Here's why you're not making any improvements in your hip mobility. Why do I know? Because I was making these same mistakes when I was first getting into trying to mobilize my hips to develop ranges of motion like the deep squat and forward fold. So what changed in my training? The ability for your hip to rotate both internally and externally is extremely important for not only the health of the hip, but for your movement quality in general. Now, if you're training your hip rotation with mobility drills you see like this, or this, or even this, then most likely you're just wasting your time and you're not truly getting what you want out of these drills. You see, the problem with mobility drills like this is there's a ton of moving parts happening and we're not truly dissociating joint segments. What I mean by that is as I move my knee down toward the ground, yes, I'm moving through internal rotation of the hip, I'm also moving through adduction of the hip, and now, as I run out of room, my lumbar spine and pelvis is going to come along for the ride. And maybe I'm just kind of hiking the pelvis here, and I'm not truly getting a good stretch through internal rotation. See, we have to understand that there's a big difference between just mobilizing our joints or taking our joints through a range of motion simply to just feel good, and actually training our mobility or flexibility of the soft tissues around the joint to express more and more range of motion over time. And this requires more attention to detail than just simply going through the motions. This is where I made a lot of mistakes early on when I first started training mobility. Not to say these drills are bad, it's probably just not going to lead to any long-term progress. You might do these mobility drills day after day, and then a year later you check back, you're still in the same position you were, as opposed to actually progressively training your flexibility to increase range of motion over time. A good rule of thumb when we're training mobility of any joint and any direction in general is we want to make the tissues that we're trying to stretch the limiting factor of the movement. So if I'm just moving dynamically through a range, I'm not actually stressing the tissue appropriately that I want to lengthen. For instance, if I truly want to get the most out of my current available hip rotation in internal rotation, when I'm in this 90-90 position, yes, we're going to have internal rotation on this trail leg hip. I don't want the motions of the pelvis and the motions of this front leg to limit what's going on here. So instead of just moving through the range here and allowing my torso and pelvis to go along for the ride, I actually want to dissociate the movement, meaning I want my pelvis to do the opposite thing that my femur is doing. And this is truly going to get internal rotation mobilizing from both a top-down and bottom-up perspective, where the pelvis is doing the opposing motion of the femur. So in this position, I have the femur in internal rotation. Now what I truly want to do is try to get my pelvis to reach the ground. So I'm trying to get this butt cheek toward the ground. And now this is really going to build a nice stretch through the hip rotators here. And now see what I'm doing with this leg. I'm allowing this to come along for the ride because I don't want external rotation of this hip limiting this hip mobility in internal rotation. So we find that the terms used for exercise can be sexy. The fact that we're calling this a 90-90 means that I have to keep this leg in 90 degrees and this leg has to stay in 90 degrees. No, we can actually take this out of 90 so we can actually prioritize this back hip. So, of course, we can actually make this drill more effective by taking our time and actually focus on dissociating these joint segments and going nice and slow. So I can move through external rotation and stretch the glute on this front hip. I can now twist my torso, really try to get that glute to touch the ground, really feel the twist in the hip capsule there. Slowly open. Allow everything to come along for the ride. I'm delaying my torso motion across for as long as possible, so I really feel that internal rotation stretch. And then once I max that out, I can let things go along for the ride. Stretch the glute, come back, slowly rotate my torso across. Think about sitting this butt cheek toward the ground. Let this leg come along for the ride. Open up, and repeat. So the more intention we place in these drills, the more we'll get out of them and the more we'll actually improve our hip internal rotation. Same with this drill, the Shinbox lift. Most people are just so focused on accomplishing the movement that they're not actually putting their intention into mobilizing hip internal or external rotation. So instead, we can go very slowly here, really focus on rotating the torso as much as possible, creating this anterior pelvic tilt, and driving that foot through the ground, and we can just hover here, making sure we're feeling what we want to feel. And if we're not feeling what we want to feel, then put the hands down. Okay, there's no shame in creating a little bit more stability for yourself so you can actually feel the muscular tissues stretch where you need to feel them stretch. So don't be drawn into the hype by these popular hip mobility drills. Yes, this looks fun to do. You can even hold a weight and do them, but I promise you're not getting a lot out of them. Be very intentional with your drills and make the limiting factor of the drills you're using the tissues that you want to be stretching. And I swear you'll get more out of just 3 to 5 slow reps in your lower body warm-up of these drills the way I've showed them, compared to 1,000 doing them without any intention at all and just going through the motion. If our goal is to improve hip rotation, make sure we're using drills that maximize our current potential of what we have available and create an intention of expanding that range of motion with each and every rep, like these. I hope this video was helpful for you, and if you're still confused on which drills to use for your hip mobility work, I offer a program on my website called the Supple Hips Program, where I use only bang for your buck drills that worked for me to develop a deep squat and comfort in my hips and get rid of my hip impingement. So grab that on my website and let me know if you have any questions.